The film begins with the Mallard Company logo featuring a duck image appearing on the screen along with voice instructions. Mallard suggests staying calm, relaxed, and preparing for the transformative experience they offer. Shortly after, a man named Joe wakes up feeling dizzy and nauseous, not knowing where he is. His phone is missing, so he tries to seek help through an iron door resembling a prison. However, he receives no response, only the sound of rolling stones. He then screams for an explanation about the place surrounded by high walls. But a mysterious man in the next room tells him to be quiet because of the noise. Joe immediately asks for an explanation from the man next to him. The man only says that tomorrow will be a tough day for Joe. Although Joe asks for further explanation, his neighbor ignores him, citing the need to return to work. Feeling played, Joe tries to climb the wall, but his efforts are in vain. Moments later, he hears a whistle and sees the guard of the place giving him a piece of bread and a bottle of water through a hole in the door. Reaching out, Joe confesses that he is a manager at Mallard Company and explains that his wife is pregnant, pleading to be let out. However, the guard ignores him and instead hits his hand with a hard object, causing immense pain. As the day begins to darken, Joe takes the food and drink and sits in the middle of a strange circle equipped with a stone grinding tool. Upon seeing Mallard's brand chips, he is surprised by a ship horn-like sound and the appearance of Mallard's projection accompanied by voices. The projection welcomes Joe to the company's advanced career training and convinces him that this program will enhance him. Feeling strange, Joe asks where he is, but the projection disappears without providing an answer. His neighbor then informs him that this place is the Mallard factory. Joe is advised to rest immediately because tomorrow might be the longest day of his life. As Joe inquired about the mysterious man's name, the man instead shouted the same question to someone else, triggering a verbal altercation. Joe then realized that many people were trapped there. Before sleeping, his neighbor informed Joe that this place was for punishing those disliked by Mallard. In the middle of the night, Joe woke up hearing the guard entering another room. Joe heard someone screaming for mercy and promising to do better tomorrow. However, the guard continued to torment them until the sound faded, leaving Joe frightened. The next morning, before 6 a.m., Joe asked his neighbor about the events of the night. However, his neighbor just said that Joe would get used to hearing those screams. The guard came to give food and drink, instructing Joe to dispose of his waste in the toilet hole. If the room appeared dirty on CCTV, Joe would face severe punishment. Reluctantly obeying, Joe felt disgusted by the smell. Shortly after, he noticed hair lying on the floor. As Joe dug, he was shocked to find a buried skull. When he reported his discovery to his neighbor, the man casually stated that many people ended up like that here. The incident further convinced Joe of his disbelief that Mallard, a trillion-dollar company with products worldwide, could do such a thing. His neighbor then asked if Joe had read the entire thick employment agreement before signing it. Reflecting on that question, Joe began to accept the reality that perhaps Mallard was allowed to do this according to its contract clauses. At that moment, Mallard reappeared, stating its intention to restore Joe's productivity to improve the company's performance. Without further explanation, Mallard assigned Joe the task of pushing the grinder from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Joe must achieve a minimum of 50 rotations per day, failing which, he would be eliminated. Mallard then added that workers with the lowest number of rotations would still be eliminated even if they reached the quota. Hearing this, Joe cursed anyone responsible for this cruel program, demanding to be released immediately. He stated that he had worked at Mallard for 10 years and had been awarded as an exemplary employee. However, Mallard remained unresponsive. His neighbor suggested the only way to survive was to follow Mallard's instructions, so Joe decided to start pushing the grinder, although unsure of when he would be freed. He struggled on the first rotation due to the rough grinder surface. After working for several hours, Joe took a break in the daytime to eat and drink, accompanied by advertisements for various Mallard products, including alcoholic beverages, cosmetics, and housing. When the workday ended, Joe managed to collect 100 rotations. In the middle of the night, Joe heard a worker scream he was eliminated for having the fewest rotations that day. The next day, before 6 a.m., his neighbor asked how many rotations he had managed. However, after telling him, Joe was asked not to say it out loud so that other workers wouldn't know and try to surpass him. On the second day, Joe reminisced about his wife, Kate, and their life in Mallard Company housing. They both were proud of their little family's achievements. However, at that moment, his wife felt pain in her stomach, indicating their child would soon be born. Those memories motivated Joe to become free soon and gather 150 rotations. Shortly after, a guard knocked on his door and ordered Joe to approach the door and remove all his clothes. Although he had many rotations, Joe was confused why he was called. It turned out Mallard just bathed him and returned him to the room. On the third working day, Joe asked his neighbor what the purpose of this grinding was, whether it was to generate electricity or something else. His neighbor only replied that the grinding served no function, making Joe even more puzzled. A few hours later, Joe ran out of water due to hotter weather than the previous day. When he asked for additional water, his neighbor laughed and said that each worker was only given 1 bottle per day. His neighbor then suggested that Joe fill his empty bottle with urine and drink it in a corner unnoticed by CCTV. However, Joe firmly rejected that suggestion. Continuing the work without additional water, Joe was once again motivated by remembering his wife, so he was determined to break free by reaching 370 rotations. This made him extremely tired, and he eventually lay down under the grinder handle. At that moment, he saw the name Alex engraved under the handle and immediately asked his neighbor about Alex. He learned that Alex was a previous worker who managed to escape. Joe wondered why Alex didn't report this strange activity to the authorities. Joe promised that if he managed to break free, he would expose this torture to everyone. The next morning, before starting work, Mallard appreciated Joe's effort in reaching 370 rotations by giving him a metal pen engraved with his name. However, the meaningless award made Joe angry, and he cursed Mallard. Unexpectedly, the previous minimum quota of only 50 rotations per day was now raised to 370 with a small red X symbol in the middle. Despite Joe's protest, Mallard ignored him, so he reluctantly accepted. However, in the first rotation, his points did not increase. His neighbor then informed him that the X symbol on the scoreboard indicated a penalty, requiring Joe to rotate twice to earn 1 rotation. Confused by the penalty he received, Joe decided to continue working because he realized time was ticking. To reach 370 points, Joe worked without rest until the end of the workday. However, he only managed to reach 262 rotations. Mallard threatened to bring his wife here to help Joe reach his quota. Joe begged Mallard not to do so and promised to obey all orders. Hearing this, Mallard agreed and placed a hovering heat emitter above Joe's room as punishment. The next morning, Joe woke up sleep-deprived, but he no longer protested Mallard's decisions. Before starting to push, he wrapped the grinder handle with his clothes. With the heat emitter constantly above him, Joe felt extremely tired, even hallucinating seeing another version of himself and realizing that his spirits were being tested by these hallucinations. However, his desire to meet his wife and their unborn child kept him working, reaching the quota despite penalties.
Joe, in success.
When he woke up at 2 a.m., he saw that the heat emitter and the X symbol on the scoreboard were gone. Mallard then rewarded him for his improvement by showing him the condition of his wife, who had given birth. Seeing this, Joe felt both sad and happy as he couldn't accompany his wife during the birth of their first child. The next morning, before 6 a.m., Joe asked his neighbor how Alex managed to escape. His neighbor decided to tell him that Alex exited through a part of the wall not caught by CCTV. As Joe observed the area, he found circular scratches and began to chip away at it little by little with his pen. The following day, although the hole was still small, Joe continued chipping away at the wall, sacrificing some of his sleep time. After work, he resumed his efforts to chip away at the wall. Several days later, Joe managed to create a hole large enough for his body. On the night he attempted to escape, Joe found that the passage he went through was just ventilation leading to the adjacent room as his hand touched the grinder stone. The guard then appeared and struck his head, causing Joe to wake up the next morning in his room with the wall repaired. Due to his actions the previous night, Mallard punished his neighbor by breaking his leg and increased the daily quota for all workers to 1,000. This caused panic among the other workers as the quota was impossible to achieve. Joe then apologized to his neighbor and learned that his neighbor was one of Mallard's engineers involved in the construction of this place. His neighbor explained that this place was built using artificial intelligence algorithms, so there was no human intervention in enforcing the rules. Hearing this, Joe had an idea for all workers to stop pushing the grinder altogether, reducing the likelihood of elimination. Surprisingly, all the workers agreed with Joe's suggestion, and they spent the day leisurely. 5 minutes before the end of the workday, Mallard appeared to remind that workers with 0 rotations would be eliminated. Upon hearing this, some workers began pushing the grinder out of fear of being left behind. Joe urged everyone to stay united, but his neighbor suggested that he should be the sacrifice for the day. Before midnight, Joe was surprised to find out that his neighbor was Alex. Alex admitted to guiding Joe to test if Joe could escape undetected. Joe bid farewell to Alex, who was eliminated that night. The next morning, Mallard appeared with Joe's newborn child to motivate Joe. However, Joe lost his patience and attacked Mallard. Mallard decided to eliminate Joe. 11 people entered with tablets as witnesses to the eliminated workers. Joe asked about the place, but there was no answer. The guard appeared and prepared a syringe, explaining that they were witnesses. Joe struck the guard as the guard threatened to take his wife. Unexpectedly, Joe woke up in another room with lights on his head. HRD, Joni, explained everything to him. After realizing his wife had not given birth and had only been in the grinder room for an hour, Joe felt relieved. Joni appreciated his efforts, especially when he united the workers. Joe was promoted and placed in a better room. Mallard's artificial intelligence presented a voice that reminded Joe of his trauma. Before Joni left, Joe was asked to keep Mallard's training program a secret. Even from his family, Joe felt pressured by Joni's behavior. Joe called his wife, who found it strange to receive a daytime call. However, he assured her that everything was fine. Knowing his family was safe, Joe planned to leave Mallard and destroy the company, and the film ends.
Your company